welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I did want to apologize again for last webinar when snowstorms went through where Henry was at the time, and actually he was losing power, hence why we lost signal and lost microphone, so that was fun. But there is no snow in the forecast today, I'm hoping anyways. And I am joined today by Phillip Perry, one of our hatchery consultants. You all know him well. I can see lots of his customers and his sites he's been at recently on the list today, so welcome to you all. And this is kind of going to be a fun webinar because for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, our very first webinar topic was actually suggested by a hatchery manager out of Alberta. And that was those 3 days in the hatcher, because he said no one really talks about what happens in a hatcher. And that really resonated with me because, yeah, really, we hear a lot about what happens in the incubator, but very little about the hatcher. So here we are today, and we're going to go over more details about the hatcher in terms of hatch window, what you're looking for there, Jamesway's HatchSense product, which works with our Platinum line, and how that can help, and what goes on in the hatcher. So we have Phillip presenting remotely for us today. And so this should be a lot of fun. As always, your controls are in the top left corner of your screen. Most important button there is your Q&A button. Use that at any time to drop in some questions that you may have for Phillip or myself, and I can ask him them live on air and get you an answer. Yeah, your audio controls are there. Your chat is also there. You can use chat to talk to our moderator, Krista, if you're having any issues. And there's a raised hand button. We really don't use it frequently, but it's there in case we do need it. So with that being said, I think we're ready to get going, Phillip.
Okay.
So yeah, take it away.
Okay, well, it's nice to have everybody on board here, and we're going to take a look at the hatch window and talk about HatchSense and the hatcher, and let you know what Jamesway has available to help with your, once we do reach the hatcher. And first thing I'd like to talk about is the hatch window. And we all have I've heard different things and different definitions for it, but the hatch window is basically the time used to describe from when the hatchlings begin to hatch until the last finish. I'll say up front, I might say chick half the time, I might say poults half the time, because I want to make everybody feel like they're part of this program, because the HatchSense does work, as well as ducklings. The HatchSense does work and is being used in all three industries at this time. But anyway, a little bit about the hatch window. In nature, generally it's a 24-hour hatch window, and we've been able to shrink that down in our single stage. Typically, if we got good eggs and in single stage, we can get a 24-hour hatch window. Multi-stage, we know, takes a little bit longer. We have a little bit more temperature variation within that compartment, but it usually takes about 30 hours to hatch it. So for artificial incubation, basically what we do to measure the hatch window, we'll take a look at when the humidity starts to rise or start, and then it peaks and then it finishes. And this typically, if you're looking at it, generally is a 24-hour window. As the hatchlings start to hatch, they release moisture and humidity starts to rise. The top of the curve is what we would call the peak hatch, and then as the hatch complete, humidity decreases. Sometimes if you're monitoring this, I know some of us are on a quick turnaround, we have to get our, as soon as we get poults or chicks out of a machine, we have to start cleaning. So sometimes that the end or the finish will look prolonged, but I think a lot of times it's just a high humidity caused in the hatch room just from cleaning and some things like that. When we take a look at what we would call a narrow hatch window, we're looking to reduce the number of fringe chicks that hatch either too early or too late as compared to the average time. We still have a bulk or the main part of our hatch coming out, maybe in a 24-hour hatch window, but we always have chicks that start a little early, and we have chicks that are always finishing a little later. And we'll take a look at some of the things that can that cause that. Even though HatchSense can help, it still takes some practical hatchery management and logistics with our eggs to make sure we have to keep things as tight as we can. Some of the things that potentials that causes a large hatch window is egg size. Variations in egg size can affect the hatch window. You know, the larger egg needs more heating at the beginning of incubation and more cooling at the end. So if you're running mixed in there in your machine, in your single stage machine, you're going to have some a variation in the hatch timing due to the egg size. And we're just sort of looking at from once the egg reaches the hatchery. This is not counting what takes place on the farm, you know, and things that can influence our longer hatch window because of the egg room, when the hen lays the egg, various egg pickup, various things like that that can influence our hatch window. The other thing is the egg age. We all know that we typically add time to egg age. And one thing that we see is that it will, eggs held longer in storage will take longer to hatch than fresh eggs. And so we need to add additional storage time. But if we're in a single stage machine, or we might have a mix of eggs within that machine. So the best thing we can do is try to get all of our egg age near the same time. Breeder age or week of lay. This certainly differences in you know, early prime and older age flocks that are in lay will cause a longer hatch window. Fertility. We know that high fertility flocks can advance the hatch window and can cause poults to hatch early. And then we have more viable embryos in that machine producing heat. So it can cause a hatch window variation. Pre-warming. Jamesway doesn't recommend pre-warming in our multi-stage machine, for those of you who tuned in from our multi-stage side. But you know, in our single stage, because we have such control over that compartment, we do like the ability to pre-warm, bring our eggs all up at the same time to the same temperature, hold them for a while in the incubator, and then they all come up to temp at the same time, which is a very important factor in shortening our hatch window. Locations of eggs in the setter. There's different places within the machine that we know maybe has a little cooler temperature. Our tops tend to run a little cooler than our bottom. We do try to, if you tuned into the 3 days, what happens 3 days in the hatcher, one thing we talked about that was very important was the egg location in the incubator and where we put that location in the hatcher to sort of, if it's in a cooler spot, then we get it in a warmer spot, or vice versa. So there is some guidelines in your manuals, in all the Jamesway manuals, for transfer, and to try to get those eggs located in a place where they'll benefit the best from. Transfer, you know, we take a look at transferring. We want to make sure there's nothing delayed. Eggs aren't exposed to wet trays. I know sometimes logistically that is a challenge for you, but you know, during the transfer process, it's not uncommon for eggs to be chilled to a slow transfer, or they pull the racks out and suddenly take break, leave the eggs out in the room. Various things like that I've seen at hatcheries that can affect or delay the hatching process and extend our hatch window. So in talking about the hatch window and some things that we can do to certainly try to tighten that window up, we're going to talk now a little bit about the HatchSense and what this system does. And as I mentioned earlier, the main thing that HatchSense that we're looking for is our fringe hatchlings, the ones that are on maybe 2 or 3, 5% out before the 24-hour window, and then the ones that continue to hatch at the end. So this is one thing that we've seen HatchSense do, is that it really helps these, what we are calling fringe hatchlings. A couple of things it does. Not only does it help slow them down and try to get them into our hatch window when they begin their hatching, but also is the quality. The chicks aren't exposed to a real harsh environment at earlier stages when they hatch, when our hatchers are running at a warmer temperature. So these are a couple of things that the HatchSense that you'll see help with fringe, help with these chicks that hatch on the outside of our hatch window. So we'll go over some of the technical aspects of our HatchSense. What it does, it allows the hatcher to control and to watch for movement. Is the first thing. Is really all the module does is it's looking for the first movement, and then the second thing that the program does, it looks for humidity changes inside the baskets. It basically watches for movement inside the baskets, and then the humidity changes are it's just watching the machine control and what the humidity is doing. And then once these changes are detected, the program adjusts the environment to decrease the hatch window. So taking a look, when we operate it, when we're attaching the HatchSense, you should always turn off the fan switch and connect the HatchSense module to the communication outlet, which is usually located on the left door on the inside panel on the console. Maybe if you haven't used the HatchSense, but if you have the newer hatchers, it will have that socket that it plugs into. And then if you have the P1 or an older style machine, it doesn't have the socket. We certainly have the retrofit kits to put the HatchSense in. So you'll attach the module to the middle rib of the hatch baskets. So it if you can you see me moving the cursor on the screen? Victoria, can you see it on the display? Is it coming through?
Yep, I think it's coming through there.
Okay, so on the HatchSense, it has these hooks that attach to the basket itself, and it always goes on our basket on the middle rib, so it attaches right there. But one thing I want to point out is that we recommend you use our hatch baskets. There's a lot of manufacturers that make hatch baskets, and I know in some areas it may be economical to go that route, but they may not have that rib, and then a lot of them I see this plate here is solid, so the HatchSense wouldn't be able to monitor the tray for movement if the sensor is covered up by that solid piece. So you would want to make sure. I've seen hatcheries. A lot of times you have both. They'll just either make sure they have Jamesway baskets in this location to ensure that it reads and scans that tray properly. And then you'll check to make sure that the power light is on. If it isn't, then we can go and we will troubleshoot and see why it's not connected. I know a hatcher is a pretty harsh environment. So anytime you're adding an electrical component outside of the process that's going on, then these have a tendency to get damaged. So want to make sure you leave those covers on the socket. Those caps are covered up. So once you get it attached, you'll see you'll go to the diagnostic screen in your setup. You'll see a green check mark beside of HatchSense. So if you're familiar with Pilot, we have check marks at it that shows that it's been attached and that the machine is detecting and it is working properly. So if there isn't any, then again, we would check to see if there's a damaged module, the system itself, or a cable is damaged. Once we have everything, connected and everything, it's suggested that you would transfer with a regular profile, a lot of times, because of the way we attach it to the baskets, it's not ready to attach until the profile, until the transfer is complete. So what we will normally just use your regular air or your normal profile to transfer, and then we'll, once we connect the HatchSense, make sure everything's connected, then we'll change over to a HatchSense profile. And the one way that we know is beside the temperature icon, you'll have a basket icon between the temp and the actual temperature readout will show that it is in a HatchSense profile. So the way it works, we've got it all attached, got it working, got our profile going. So up until day 19 days 4 hours, it really is not doing anything. But after this point, 19 days 4 hours for chickens and 25 days 8 hours for turkeys, the HatchSense module activates the white LED lights on the rear side of the module. So what we're trying to do, if there is any activity, if any chicks or poults have hatched, this light will get them to move, and the sensor can detect that it has seen movement. One thing I will mention, if you do have a reason, a mechanical failure, or some reason that you have to get into the machine once activation has taken place on the module, simply turning the fans off suspends the profile, and it will not activate any movement you do. I know some people fumigate once they've at different times and they need access to get inside the hatcher. We recommend just using the right-hand door away from where the HatchSense module is, just so it doesn't detect any movement.
Right.
So throughout this time, the motion, once they're activated, the detectors are active and they're scanning for motion inside the baskets. Again, it shouldn't be disturbed during this time, as it'll mistakenly trigger the machine to advance to the internal PIP phase, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. Again, anytime you would need to get into that machine, I would just turn the fans off. During the first part of hatching, it's not going to hurt anything for a short amount of time if you have to get in there for any mechanical reason. And also in this display on this picture here, that's typically about where the HatchSense is mounted, a couple trays down from the top. And usually we go inside at least a couple of columns. We'll go in one column, and then if you're using a P30 where the trays are orientated sideways, then you would just reach in and put it on that column inside at least one. I guess it really doesn't matter where you put it. We're just trying to get a sampling of an average sampling of that machine of where we feel it will do the best benefits for the hats as they come off.
So Philip, for the P30, sorry, we're still going to put it on the end of the basket. It's just going to be more looking across the machine instead of down into the machine. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we always, if you didn't do that, then you wouldn't have as large an area to scan for.
Right.
And again, going back to if you're using another manufacturer's patch basket, you'll have issues as well for proper scanning. Yeah. Get the full length. So what the HatchSense profile, as you're looking at at this profile I've got up, your profile has 20 slots in it, and that you always have available for your temperature and your time. The 9 steps that the HatchSense uses must use 9 of those steps within your profile. So as you see here with chickens, as I mentioned earlier, after 19 days, 6 hours, it's going to begin scanning. And so this block of time goes in here, and then at the end, it'll count that up. And then at the end of that, at 21 days, the profile will have ended, and then you can just go into your regular profile at that time. Typically what I'll do, if you have a profile that you like, that works well for you, especially on the cooling end of it, this particular machine, it shows down at the 23 days, 3 hours, they're down to 94.5. I'll just go in and just remove all those steps in the profile after 19 days, 8 hours, put my block in, and then finish off at the end where we normally would to get those chicks cooled on off once everything is finished with the hatch. So this is looking at a chicken. This would be a turkey profile. Really, both profiles are very similar. The only thing with chickens, with the first step at 8 hours, it goes up to 8,500. We'll go into that a little bit more in detail. Turkeys, I just run a little bit lower at 7,500 parts per million. And then the second step, which another step we'll take a look at, also have a little bit lower CO2 setting. So how the module works? So what it's doing, it's monitoring 4 baskets, and then so when it detects movement in 2 of the baskets, then it'll advance to the first internal, we call it internal pip step in the profile, marked as 0. So once it sees movement in 2 baskets, then it advances to this first step. So what you see here, we went from a 97.8 down to 96 degrees. So what we've done, we tried to make the embryos very comfortable. And so after this set point change, we lower the temperature, and we also lower CO2. We're just trying not to stress them. We really don't want, and these are a couple of things that will help slow the hatch down. These fringe chicks from hatching, it'll slow them and help keep them and put them more into the hatch window. After any set point change, the way our program's designed, and some of you may have been aware of this, it takes the machine has a built-in 14-minute step that it allows for that machine to do this cooling. So going from a degree, almost 2 degrees step down here, it'll allow 14 minutes for that step to occur. And then at that time, the temperatures, if it's still too far out, then your alarm delay kicks in, showing the alarm once the delay expires. So if it would give the machine 14 minutes to cool, and then it would get on top of that, it would be your regular delay, whatever your high temp alarm delay is. If you got it set for 2 minutes or whatever, it'd have another step in that. But if you have good cooling, good ventilation, we very rarely have any temperature alarms. Usually high temp alarms occur after 21 days if we're trying to cool machines down significantly. But it usually has plenty of time to do these steps. So once it on your machine, on the machine is a picture there of the display, shows the pip icon. Will show an egg beside of it. So this particular screenshot, I just grabbed one, but I just wanted to show you that to know the machine, as far as the days are, will continue to count as it is in the here in the actual days and times, whether you're doing a percentage of a day or hours, it'll continue to count. But as you've seen in the HatchSense profile, it actually shows these steps here, but where the HatchSense steps are in, these it'll just it doesn't have the regular days and hours that you would see in a profile, except that you can monitor it here, and then you can look here and see exactly what step you are in when you look at your profile on your screen or on your HatchCom 4. But anyway, the birds are made very uncomfortable. At the end of the 8 hours, the second PIP step raises the temperature to 98 degrees. So here are a couple of the settings that we have found to be the most beneficial to tighten up our hatch window. You can these points can be changed. The hours, the 0 always has to be part of the profile for the 0 hour here, but you can change these different steps if you like. And in fact, we actually have a layer hatchery that tested it. They actually liked once they start seeing their first pipping, they would try to get their chicks to come on out. And so what they'll do, they'll at this 0 step, they'll go ahead and raise their temperature and their CO2 to try to stimulate the hatching. So these are some guidelines that we normally put in, are usually successful, and most people will just run with this profile. But at the same time, you have the capability in your hand that you can choose some things that you might help your hatch or the particular breed or strain that you're hatching to help with that. So at the end of this, the third step, then the humidity step becomes active. So we're done with the module. The module really has done its thing at the +0 hours. It's seen the movement, it's moved the profile forward, and it started counting down these sequence of hours up until 12 hours. Once we reach the 12 hour, the third step, then it becomes the humidity step becomes active. So the machine begins, the actual humidity has to go above the set point by an amount programmed, which we'll discuss later in the setup screen. And then it has to stay above that level. And then it goes, once the humidity starts to fall, it'll know, as we were talking earlier about our peak hatch, it's seeing that the peak hatch is completed and is starting to end. And then once it sees that, then it'll drop down to the 0 hours on the humidity. And during this time frame, we also disable humidity within the machine because we don't want any humidity to come on, because it could interfere with this detection. If you would have a lower humidity value, it would be coming on and the machine would not really not see. And in fact, most hatcheries, and it's I recommend if you can have a 45% relative room humidity, I would just turn your humidity off. I think it's not beneficial, and you'll have a much cleaner chick. It also prevents down from collecting on your fan guards, which can cause overheating. If the humidity, if it's calling for an excessive amount of humidity for any reason, that down will collect on your fan guards and also on your ECU cooling coils whenever you have an excessive amount of humidity. Instead of if we got a lighter, fluffier feathers, it's just removed out the back exhaust. So anyway, so when the humidity peak is detected, the profile advances to the first step, which we talked about. Let me get my notes here. So then from this point onward, all the humidity steps will execute in sequence as the specified hours at their peak are reached. So it'll just continue to go on down and just advance all the way down through. On your display on the front of your machine, it will show the humidity icon that you have reached this state in your profile, and you'll know that the humidity peak has occurred and it has advanced, and it's going down through these steps. And then the next thing is For 2 hours after this sequence steps, you notice here we take the profile back up to 98 degrees and we have a short high CO2 burst. And say burst, what we're trying to do is close the dampers down and make them a little bit more uncomfortable, but just for a short period because we've already passed our peak hatch. And once I reach peak hatch, I like to start dropping temperature pretty rapidly from then on. I feel like as humidity is rising to the peak of the hatch, I feel like we can add heat, and it really doesn't seem to hurt them that much. It seems to help some of the buttons if you're having button issues with your chicks or poults. I like to add keep my heat around 97.8, 98 degrees up until the peak hatch, and then after that, then I start dropping it very rapidly. So we have just a short burst here, and what we're trying to do is to prompt our late hatching chicks to come on out and to back up and to get in line with the rest of the guys and to hatch out on time. And again, it's usually 2 hours after the peak hatch has occurred. So you're probably asking, so a good question is, so what happens if no movement or humidity peak are detected? And I'm glad you asked that question. So so what we have is a couple of on your setup screen on your hatcher, you have the HatchSense icon here, and you can set up your days and hours that if it hasn't detected a pipping or movement in the two trays, we go ahead and tell it to advance the profile. And the value should be selected so that the profile has sufficient time to complete the steps before the humidity level would start to peak. Otherwise, the humidity phase may not have enough time to finish. So you want to give yourself enough time as you put these values in so that it can go through all the steps. And it'll just advance to the first step, and just by us telling it when to. And then the humidity, we also have a setup for it, and we can set day and cycle when we want the profile to advance to this part of our profile and to advance the profile forward, and then just go through those sequences of times down through, so that in case we would, for whatever reason, the trays we would select or whatever would not have activity, or it didn't see the peak humidity. You know, one thing I will say about the humidity step, again, as I mentioned earlier, when you're cleaning in that room, you know, the humidity levels go sky high, the floor's wet, it can affect that. So it's very important that, you know, you program your humidity step so that if that is occurring on you, that you can get that machine to advance in the profile and start cooling your chicks down. And so anyway, that determines when the changes take place. This is pretty much, I think it's default, and it's pretty much what we use. I have seen some hatcheries use 20 days. They want the peak time out to start occurring at that time. But again, there's flexibility here, and you know, you can do whatever you know, you would like to do with it, whatever works the best for your hatchery. This is a turkey hatcher set up here. So turkeys, again, we would be looking for a timeout of 25 days, 23 hours. Still, in all the avian species that I have been associated with, we still pretty much get a 24-hour hatch window, regardless. And so it's just that, you know, for your ducks and for your in some of your other strains, even though you may have a longer incubation cycle, the hatching process, typically, we are looking for a 24-hour hatch window. I'm going to take a look now. Here is a couple of graphs. I hope you can see this. I'll just, let me move a little bit forward here in my notes. Okay, so what I have here is a temperature and a humidity actual reading that I took off of HatchCom, And it just shows the values. So here we are running at 98 degrees temperature-wise. So this machine, the first step in motion was detected at 19 days, 17 and a half hours. This seems to be a fairly stable number. I've noticed. I've done quite a bit of testing, anywhere from 19 days, 16 hours, up to about 20 days, 1 hour is usually when we'll detect the first movement. So once this movement is detected, we see here that temperature went from 97.8 down to 96 degrees, and this was that 8 hours. As you can see, we are having still having some hatching activity, even though we lowered this temperature. It does help these chicks that do hatch to keep them in a better environment until we go to the third peak step. So once at the time of 8 hours is used up, this is where we run the temperature back up to 98 degrees, and we run our CO2 up. You see the how quickly the the humidity ramps up. And so it ran like this until 20 days, 15 hours, when it started seeing the humidity start to decline. We peaked hatch, and then we've cooled it down, helping these get comfortable, and then we ramped it up real quick here for the fourth and remaining step. And then all these steps here onward, from here onward, are sequential. So temperature-wise, we're just starting to drop it down, and as you can see, the humidity starts to drop as well as the chicks or poults complete their hatch. On this graph here, I'm just showing the humidity rise and when it was detected. So this particular machine detected movement at 20 days and a half hour. So as you can see here, so the first step over here on your right, first step occurred, really slowed down our hatching. And then the second step, once we went into this, you can see the humidity rise. We get a very high peak. Over here is the second step, shows here. Third step here. And then the fourth step, when we actually do our, sees the humidity fall. And we got a little bump here where we're trying to get out our late hatch to continue on with the hatching. And then here's another one of values I took. This one was, pretty much a 20-hour hatch window. Yes.
Can you step back to the previous slide, please? I just have a question on it from Chris.
Okay.
The one before that, I think. The one more. Yeah. So Chris was just asking what your day scale is down here. Is that in days and hours, or that's in days and fractions of a day?
Yeah, fractions, percentage, yes.
Yeah, so that one, Chris, is in fractions of a day down in here. Like, I think that's 19.67, 19.76 in the middle. So that's that one. And then the next slide, Philip, is in days and hours, right?
Yes. I got a hold of HatchCom 4 by that time, so I was able to do the graph in days and hours.
Oh, you need HatchCom 4 to do that. That's cool. I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, right. The graphs. Yeah, I'll do a plug for HatchCom 4. It does do it in days and hours. So
perfect.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think we were looking at this slide last. Just pretty much shows a 20-hour hatch window where we got the bulk of the chicks out. Again, the HatchSense will help tighten up your hatch window, but as we said in the beginning, there's very important steps that you do when you have the ability to do it, to tighten up that hatch window in your operation and your logistics of getting your eggs set and the size of the eggs and other variable factors. So one thing one hatchery has done with the machine update 4.20 and greater, the HatchSense profile can be operated without a motion sensor module. and will operate on timeouts. So what you can actually do, you can run the profile or a higher CO2 and run just do it on timeouts. You just say, like for this example, at 20 days, 2 hours, if just go ahead and start that sequence of steps without a motion sensor. So you could do this, and then your humidity peak phase would still be searching for that. So if you did choose to use it without the module, it can be the profile can be used that way. Most hatcheries
that's a good way to kind of get an idea of what you would see from HatchSense. Of course, it's not going to be as well because it's missing that first motion step. So the timing, I guess, won't be quite as precise as we would like it, but still a great way to kind of try it out and see if it's something that you think works for your facility. Yes,
yeah. And one thing I would stress with using the HatchSense, if I come to your hatchery, you've heard me harp on calibration. Make sure your calibrator is calibrated, but you do want to make sure your CO2 is calibrated and your temperature calibrated, because we're subjecting some pretty harsh environments. We feel like it's controlled, and it does make them want to hatch, but at the same time, if you're not calibrated properly, you need to certainly get the equipment or ensure you have a great calibration program. And I know CO2 seems to be the sensors just really have a very good integrity. They I go to hatcheries and they go 4 to 6 months and never have to adjust their CO2 calibration. It's a very accurate, reliable sensor, but we would want to make sure that it was calibrated and temperature as well. We wouldn't want to run get our chicks over 98 degrees, much more than that, or we could cause mortality or different things like that. But it is a couple of things. But yes, you can run it if you have the newer update on your machine. And I would say this: if you would need that update, to run it.
Yeah.
So utilizing any and all possible resources to control and reduce hatch windows should be taken into consideration for every successful hatchery, including the Jamesway HatchSense system. So this pretty much concludes my webinar today on the HatchSense, and I'll turn it over to Victoria. But I hope we've given you some ideas, and if you have any questions, we'll try to answer them here, and if not, we'll certainly get back with you.
For sure. I do have a question. It's been sitting there for a little bit. Thanks for your patience, Emily. And Emily is asking, what do you run in terms of fan speeds in a turkey hatcher?
Depending on the hatch, on a turkey hatcher, but I usually go 70, 80, 90, or 80, 90, 100%. So at day 25, I'd be 80, 26 be 90, and then 27 I go on up to 90 or to 100, depending on the machine. P30 I'll usually run a little bit slower speeds, and then pick up speed in the in a P40, which is not typically used for turkeys. One way to think a little bit about a hatcher in growing up, I guess in our education, we always thought the more fan or the more velocity of air we could have, the better off things are. But please, if you take into consideration, if you got a P60 incubator, the fans going into your P30 hatcher are the same velocity of fan, same size and everything. So, but it's half as many eggs. So it's really not, it's an over velocity of air that is not being used. And I just think we have a better air mixing, better environment.
So if I can just kind of ask a follow-up question to that, if I'm running my hatchery right now, I have my hatcher profile that I like. Do I need to change my fan speeds with the HatchSense, or I stay where I'm at, basically? Like, is the HatchSense going to affect where my fan speed settings are?
Well, that's a good question, but we've just continued to use the setup that is in the hatchery that they're using, and it doesn't seem to doesn't affect it at all. But yes, I would just run that.
Okay, we got a whole bunch of questions now, so I'm glad everyone is interested. One thing I'd love for everyone to do, if you could raise your hand if you already have HatchSense, I'd just love to get a quote or a count on that. Emily has a kind of a follow-up question to that, so I'm going to go with that one first. She wanted to know if we'd ever thought about the ability to go to fractional days to change fan speeds. So for example, at day 26 and a half or 26 and 5 hours, not sure which one you're using there, Emily, but I know we don't have that functionality right now, Emily, but what I'll do after this webinar is I'll actually go down and talk to Renee. He's our programmer. He's the guy who's designed the Platinum controls and HatchCom, and he's fabulous. And I'll give him that suggestion. So Emily, if you also want to shoot me an email at webinars@jamesway.com or directly to me, victoria.frail@jamesway.com, I can let you know when that is released. But I'm pretty sure that Renee should be able to put that function in. We just have to talk to him about it.
Yeah, so I think it's been asked to go into the regular profile itself, the days and hours, and see if it, I think it's been, Emily, it's been, as Victoria said, we're thinking about it, trying to get it in there.
Phillip, can you just stop your share? It'll be at the top of your screen. There'll be a small bar with stop share. Perfect. So let's see. I'm kind of going to bounce around here. And I did see quite a few of you do have HatchSense, so that's great. I'm glad you're all on here. I hope you're all liking it. And if you need any help ever, Phillip is your guy. So Chris is asking, is HatchSense available for the PT100 hatcher with HatchCom 3? And that's a no. HatchSense is only available on the Platinum machines because we need the touchscreen based controls, that computer that is in there. If you do watch, Chris, I don't know if you were on the very first webinar, but Phillip does give some ideas on how to use HatchCom 3. That's what we had at that time. In terms of kind of putting in a similar profile and looking at your hatch window through HatchCom for your multi-stage machines, so you can find that kind of information. Unfortunately, we don't have a HatchSense for the multi-stage line of hatchers. That actually runs into another question I had, Phillip. If I have multi-stage incubator, I've gone Platinum hat. This is a trend we're seeing, guys, is that a lot of customers are replacing their hatchers with the Platinum hatcher. And I know that we have some improvements in quality by doing that. How much more of an improvement do I see if I add HatchSense, and am I able to really get that hatch window under that 30-hour mark?
Well, I'm sure we could shorten the 30 hours, maybe down to 26, 28 hours. But it could be put in. We would just need to extend the settings a little bit just to make sure we cover the whole window going in. But as you said, a lot of hatcheries do that, go from multi-stage to our single stage machine, and you would be able to utilize HatchSense with that. And I'm thinking I have done that at a couple turkey facilities, and it was successful. But they were phasing out their multi-stage, so they're no longer using it. But it does work, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that hatchery manager happens to be on the call, so hi to you out there. So we have John, and I'm pretty sure John also has HatchSense at his facility, but he's asking, what's the easiest way to measure a hatch window? Is it through counting birds, or is it through using humidity levels?
I like to use the humidity level. That way I'm disruptive to the machine. When you count birds, you know, you have to pull that whole rack. If they're stackable baskets, it's very hard to count birds unless you're just counting the top ones. So I like to use that as a tool again, but I have done both, and I just think it's disruptive. I feel like, you know, when chicks or poults are in the hatching process, if that shell membrane is exposed to a dry humidity all at once, I think that it sort of toughens that membrane up, and it becomes harder for them to break through, or if they partially pipped around, it just seems like it just really hardens if it's exposed to a dry environment all at once.
Great.
Well, and I guess
Oh.
another thing into that, if you're using HatchSense, you would know when you had movement in two baskets as well, or when hatch started. You may not know the length of your window, but it would. I'm just while I was we were thinking about it there. Yeah, would be another.
So I have a question from Saul. He's asking how we set our temperature and humidity, and what is more important during transfer? Is it temperature or humidity or ventilation?
Yes, or both, or all three. All three are important. I mean, we all know that you know, temperature can certainly kill if it gets out of hand, or really affect our quality. And ventilation as well is critical. But yeah, I would think temperature and ventilation, all three are very important. But yeah, I'm called on to investigate more often than not when damage has been done to a hatch or a cycle. It's normally temperature.
All right. I have a question from Anthony, kind of sticking in that multi-stage theme here. He wants to know if you have any ways to manage a Super J hatcher. He doesn't say whether it's a common wall or a PX, but to tighten the hatch window.
Most of that would be what we discussed at the front of the video. All of those would be things that would tighten the window, and then just check the general operation of the machine. Make your pressure inside the cabinet, your crossbar entrance in crossbar. You just need to make sure that all those things are in place to tighten up your hatch window. Humidity within a multi-stage machine, it can really cause some evaporative cooling if the spray is not being managed properly. Large droplets can land on your particular areas of the machine, cool those eggs down, and create a longer hatch window. So that would just the basics. It's just amazing that how these little things add up, and you know, but the little things do add up in a good way too if you can get them all corrected and running correctly.
That's it. We have one more from Josh. Josh is asking about a statement we made a little bit earlier about pre-warming for stage, and this is a question I hear come up all the time. We don't recommend pre-warming for our multi-stage. So he wants to know, should we be going directly from the egg cooler right into the machine? So 65 degrees right into our multi-stage incubator?
Yes. Yeah, that's our standard practice, is to go directly in. You know, pre-warming for multi-stage racks or whatever, if you have a room or a facility where you can get all those eggs to come up like we can inside of a platinum, yes, I mean, by all means, you can do that. But our testing and researching that in the past, the outside eggs will warm up, and then you take egg shell or internal egg temps on the inside of those trays, and the eggs may not even change that much. So it's just not a good practice. That would be the only way that I would do it. But yes, that's why we recommend going straight from our egg room into our incubator, because so we can get all those embryos and all those eggs coming up together, and to prevent your hatch spread being too long.
Yeah, Philip, you just cut out a little bit there, so I'll just reiterate for Josh, I think it was, that yeah, the issue that we've really found with pre-warming is that you're not getting a uniform temperature across all the eggs in the rack. Eggs on the outside are getting a lot warmer than the eggs on the inside. So that difference is good. You know, the difference in total amount of heat that those eggs are receiving is actually going to change your hatch window, right?
Right.
That's really where you're going to see the effects, is on hatch window and on quality, because ultimately what we want in any incubation cycle in any incubator is we want all the eggs to receive the same amount of total heat without ever getting too hot or too cold, right? And that pre-warming, unfortunately, is adding extra heat to some eggs, and the others are often left behind. So if you had a really good pre-warming chamber, something with fans, a lot of air movement, and you can actually get some nice uniform temperatures, then that's a different story, right? Like if you were sticking them into a platinum to pre-warm them, that would be better. But unfortunately, most pre-warm rooms are just a small hallway. They're rolling the racks in. It's a warm room, but there isn't enough air movement for that egg pack to actually get a uniform temperature, and that's the problem we have there.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Lots of great questions. I think a lot of you will probably agree that this is one of my favorite topics, is what happens in the hatchery, because like we said, it's not something we hear about when we go to education conferences and that sort of thing. So the next webinar, that will be January 15th. I'll be speaking to you all from here in Cambridge on ventilation. We'll be going over the airway system. Sort of a rebrand happened last year on Jamesway's ventilation, and we have three main options: airway element, airway modular, and airway classic. And I'll go over the differences and the similarities between those, and can really answer your questions. The nice thing about all three systems is that they can be retrofit onto any hatchery. So whether you are building a new hatchery or you just need to replace some rooftops that are going down, you know, Jamesway is here to help with that, and with our ventilation controls as well. So that will be January 15th. Look for the email invite to come out a week or two before that. And I hope to see you all back then. Philip, thank you so much for joining me. Educational as always. Love our chats. And thank you again, everyone.